All right. So hopefully you watched enough of the first video, you understand the problem. So let me talk about what we're going to do now. So what we need to do is we're going to use maps to answer some of these questions. So for example, these individual ones we'll come back to in a second, but let's talk about we want to figure out uh, the cost per win of a team. So if we think of the data that we have in the team file, I'm sorry, the salary file is really what we need to get to. We need to total up for a team ID for a given year, what was the salary of all those players? And so really what we care about is year and ID, and then we add up everything else that matches in this right here. So if the team ID is the same and the year ID is the same, then we add up that salary from that. We don't care about individuals in this statistic, so we can ignore the individual, but we need to add that up. And then that falls into the team data a little bit. I'm just going to open these in the text editor so that way we have to bounce back and forth. But the team ID is then going to tell us, because this file doesn't tell us the team name, it just gives us ATL, which is Atlanta, but you may or may not know that. But we can look up from that team ID and the year, we can figure out what the number of wins they had in that year. And then we have the franchise here as well, which we need to figure out what the franchise name is. So in the team ID, we have the team ID, but we also have the franchise ID, and we can go get the team franchise from there. As we saw before in the data, there is a name of the uh, the team back here, but we want to use the franchise name so we can see it across years because the team name might change over time, as you've seen in. Well, I think Cleveland is changing their team name. They'll no longer be the Indians. They're going to be something else coming soon. But the franchise can be the Cleveland baseball team across the years. All right. So that's what we need to do now. And so how do we do that in code? Well, let's just start by reading the files. That's going to be the easy thing to get going. Then we'll worry about what we do with the data there. The thing about problem solving is if you don't know how to solve the big problem, tackle something you do know how to solve. And so if you don't know how to get to this big answer, well, let's start with I need to open a file and get the data from that. Well, if you don't know how to open the file and get the data from that, do you know how to open a file? If you don't, well, that's what Google's for. So don't try and Google big problems. How do I read baseball statistics? Try and Google small problems, something that's much more relatable to a quick answer. Like how do I open a file in Java? So I could show you how to Google that, and I'm sure you can, but I'm going to just kind of skip forward to say, hey, oh, by the way, if you want to know, there are videos out there, especially in that bottom section, that show much of the details of reading files if you want to learn more academically about what reading files from, not just from the example. But there's this thing called a buffered reader, which I love to use for reading files. There's also something called scanner I don't love to use. I prefer buffered reader because it's a little bit more organized. Scanner does a lot of stuff you don't need it to do. But it could work well if you trust your data, and it could work well in this situation. So the buffered reader, I'm going to hit Control Space, and when I hit Control Space, it automatically adds the import for buffered reader for me right there. So buffered reader in is going to be equal to a new buffered reader. That's a pretty standard thing in Java. And what does it take? Well, it takes a reader file. Well, I don't know what a reader is, but I do know that there's this thing called a new file reader. All right, so there's the file reader, and that takes a file, but it also will take a string, which is the file name, and that's what I have right here. So let's start with the franchise file. Control Space in Eclipse will then type the rest of this variable that's already defined for me out. So I'm going to read in the buffered reader, and so what can I do with a buffered reader? In dot, well, let's see what it does. I can read an integer. I read a line. That's much better. So let's just read a line from this file and do a system.out.println of reading that line. So a really basic start, which is perfectly okay. If you know more than this, jump forward, fast forward the video, go for it. But if you've never opened a file before, well, this is how you do it in Java. I'm sure you've opened a file in another language, but this is how you do it in Java. So now I want to test my code in this uh, organizational structure. The test is all going to be run through this test folder with test stats. This is going to be true for all of them. They're all going to have a test folder inside of there. They're going to have some tester, which is what's called a JUnit tester. You can open this and look at it if you want to. You're welcome to. You're encouraged to. But you also can just click on it and hit run, and it will run that tester for you. If you just hit run without selecting that, it's going to run whatever it ran last in your program. So you need to make sure you focused on your test file, and that might include opening it. So you can see if I open it, what it does, it sets up, it creates a new instance of my object, passing those 3 files into me, and then it runs these tests over here. The results of the test show up in this little window, and you can see I've not passed a single test. I've got 5 failures, and 2 of them were worse. They had errors that are associated with it, a null pointer exception. And a null pointer exception means I haven't returned something that it's expecting I've returned something, right? So that's fine. I don't actually care about any of these tests for now. What I care about is right here. You can see it actually ran and printed out the first line of the file. So we can see the franchise file, franch ID, franch name, active, NA associate. It printed that out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and then it printed out wins, and it did it a 7th time. And this is a great example of what happens in a JUnit test. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tests inside of here, and it's going to create a new object for every single one of those tests, which is why it's printing it out 7 times. And one of these is printing out the results, just so you can see, and this is the answer that it's getting on each of them. And you don't get any points for this one. The score is 0, but it lets you see it. That way you can see what the results are as you come up with answers. All right, so very, very simple. That is printing out the first line of the file. This first line of the file, you can see, is separated into 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of data. So how do I take the file and convert it into data? By the way, if you want to read out the whole bit of data here, I can say string line is equal to, I've been doing too much Python where I don't need to put my types out there. String line is equal to read line, while line is not equal to null. And then I can do a system.out.println line. And the thing you cannot forget, and I almost always forget it, is to read the next line. Otherwise, it'll loop forever. And so this will 7 times it's going to read and print the whole file. Unfortunately, my computer's quite fast, so I don't notice it. But you can see I'm reading the entire file here, and it does so 7 different times. But that's just a quick way to show you I can loop through all of them. I'm actually going to comment this out for a second. I wanted to show that to you in case you wanted to jump forward. But now we need to parse out into a comma-separated list. There's a couple different ways we can do this. There's something called a string tokenizer, which is the old way of doing it. I'm going to show you the newer way of doing it, which is just a string. I'm going to call it tokens, because I follow with that. So what a token is, it's the things between the commas. And so this is going to be line dot split, comma. So this uses a regular expression generator, but I'm going to not do something super fancy. Oops, I'm sorry, this is an array of strings. I'm going to do something really simple, which is saying I'm going to split this every time I see a comma. And so then I can do a system.out.println of, let me do arrays.toString. So this is a fancy way to be able to print out a whole array, because it won't print out the contents if you just say print tokens. So I'm going to print out the tokens that I get from that line, so you can see very quick and easy how I can convert the line I read into a array where the first item is the franchise ID, the second item is the franchise name, the third is the active, and the fourth is the association. All right, so really quick and easy. Maybe, perhaps, I think, but a couple lines of code at least. We've now got to the point of reading files. Again, this bit of code right here can absolutely go inside of here. I can, uncomment this, and I can, then get the whole thing. Not very useful, but you can see it all gets printed out at this point as the original line and the array that we now have. And so we don't need this. We don't need this one anymore. All right, so I'm going to leave it there. Again, if you aren't sure where to go next, keep watching the videos. If this is all you needed, run with it. You have the little bit of information you need to go off and read files in Java and do your thing.